Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we try to cut through the noise and get you straight to what really matters. Today, we're looking into a really complex moment in international diplomacy. The European Union, you often think of it as this united front, right? But right now, it's really struggling with some deep internal divisions, and that's creating significant challenges for how it acts on the world stage. Our focus today is an informal meeting. EU foreign ministers got together in Copenhagen Saturday, August 30th, 2025. And the main thing they were talking about was what to do, really, what action to take, if any, about the war in Gaza. Now, the sources we're using for this deep dive, they paint a pretty stark picture of the backdrop to these talks. They use some strong language describing it as Israel's genocidal war, talking about atrocities, Israeli death, destruction, and even man-made starvation in Gaza.
It's a grim picture.
Absolutely. So it's this really dire humanitarian situation that these EU ministers were there to address. So our mission today is to kind of unpack these discussions, look at the nuances, see where the EU's fault lines really are, and explore the actions being proposed, all against this, intense humanitarian backdrop. And just to be clear, we're navigating this impartially, okay? Just focusing on what's in the source material we have so you get a full picture.
Yeah, and it's important to remember this isn't just about, one policy decision or a simple vote. This moment really reflects deeper struggles inside the EU about its core values, its principles, and just the practicalities of dealing with other countries, especially when you've got huge humanitarian crises like this one. It's kind of a moment of truth, really, testing the EU's unity, its identity on the world stage. It reveals the philosophies that either guide them or sometimes stop them from acting together.
Okay, so the situation in Gaza is getting worse. What was the feeling among the ministers in Copenhagen? How did these splits start showing up?
Well, the tone, according to our sources, was pretty much set by the EU's own humanitarian aid chief. They made this really strong, almost urgent call for the ministers to find a strong voice that reflects our values and principles. And that immediately threw the divisions into sharp relief. You could see the split among the 27 members right away. On one side, you had countries like Spain and Ireland. They were pushing for what they called heavy pressure on Israel to get them to stop the punishing attacks on Palestinians. They felt a strong response was needed based on international law and protecting civilians.
Right. And then the other side, we've got countries like Germany and Hungary described as, firm allies of Israel. And they preferred little or no action at all. That's a huge gap, ideologically. And it doesn't sound like it was just a quiet disagreement behind closed doors either. People were saying things quite openly, weren't they?
Oh, absolutely. And it's fascinating how they talked about their positions and their reasons behind them. Take Germany, for example. Its history, its post-Holocaust commitment to Israel's security, that's like a cornerstone of their foreign policies. So they often put that relationship first.
Okay.
But then you contrast that with Spain or Ireland. They have their own histories, national struggles, and they often focus on international law, self-determination. That tends to make them more outspoken for Palestinian rights. So these aren't just different opinions. They're really deep-seated national viewpoints clashing.
Yeah, I see.
Spain's foreign minister, José Manuel Albares, he sounded really frustrated even before the meeting started. He told Al Jazeera the EU was doing too little too late, and that just doing nothing hadn't achieved anything for Gaza. He was very clear he wanted to ramp up the pressure on Israel during these talks in Copenhagen. You could feel the urgency from him.
But it wasn't only Spain and Ireland speaking out forcefully. The host, the Danish foreign minister, Lars Løkke Rasmussen, he made a statement that really caught people's attention. Our sources quote him directly on Saturday. He said, "We are witnessing the most catastrophic humanitarian catastrophe. Israel must change its course. We should find common ground." That's pretty strong language, especially from the host.
It really is. And Rasmussen didn't just leave it at criticism. He actually put a specific, concrete proposal forward from Denmark. He really pushed past the usual talk. He said, and I'm quoting here, "I am not revealing a secret by saying we must change words into sanctions."
Okay.
Denmark is ready to suspend the trade chapter in the association agreement and put sanctions on the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu government and some ministers in his government.
Wow. Suspending the trade chapter, that's significant.
It's huge. That agreement is basically the backbone of EU-Israel economic ties. Suspending the trade part would freeze a whole lot of trade and cooperation. It's a major economic lever. So yeah, it shows a member state really trying to move beyond just words to specific, tangible actions. A clear desire for something impactful right now.
Okay, so you have that kind of strong feeling in the room, especially from the host nation. What actual proposals were being discussed for concrete action? and how did they go down? One key thing mentioned was this idea of an initial punitive action, suspending EU funding to Israeli startups. Our sources say this wasn't just floated casually. The EU's executive body had actually proposed it last month, so it seemed like maybe a first step some could agree on.
Well, that's the interesting question, isn't it? Why did even that struggle to get agreement if it seemed like a more moderate step? Diplomats apparently revealed that while countries like France, the Netherlands, Spain, Ireland, they were supportive of limiting Israeli access to this EU research funding, which is, pretty important for innovation. Others, like Germany and Italy, just weren't backing it yet. Our source says the bloc has failed to garner the majority needed to actually do it. It just clearly shows how deep the division runs. Even a relatively small initial step becomes this big political fight when those underlying principles are so different.
Yeah, you can see that. And the EU's foreign policy chief, Kaja Kallas, she didn't exactly mince words about the outcome, did she? She told reporters on Friday, "I'm not very optimistic, and today we are definitely not going to adopt decisions. It sends a signal that we are divided." That's pretty blunt.
It is blunt, and it cuts right to the heart of the issue. It's not just about failing to get enough votes for one specific measure. It's about the message that sends out to the world and to EU citizens themselves. When you can't even agree on something relatively contained, like the startup funding, it just broadcasts this lack of cohesion, lack of common purpose. And that looks especially bad when there's this urgent humanitarian crisis happening that really demands a unified, strong response. It makes you question the EU's effectiveness, really, when it can't speak with one voice on something so critical.
And beyond these political splits among the ministers, our sources keep coming back to the sheer intensity of the humanitarian situation fueling the whole debate. Many EU governments have apparently sharply criticized Israel's conduct during the war, especially concerning civilian deaths and the restrictions on aid getting in. This isn't just diplomatic talk. It's about a real devastating human cost that's getting a lot of international focus.
Exactly. And if you connect that to the bigger picture, the outcry globally really intensified after a global hunger monitor, one that works closely with the UN and major aid groups. The Integrated Food Security Phase Classification, or IPC. They said last week they determined there was famine in Gaza.
Wow, the IPC, that's a major finding.
Huge. They're basically the gold standard globally for assessing food crises. Their word carries enormous weight. But then, our sources point out, Israel rejected that finding.
Rejected it?
Yeah, despite overwhelming evidence, according to the source material. Which, just makes the international response even harder and deepens the moral crisis many feel. That rejection adds another layer of difficulty, really. Makes people question if the international community can actually do anything.
And it sounds like it's not just governments reacting anymore. Al Jazeera's Hashem Aholbara, reporting from Copenhagen, he noticed a real change's mood on the streets of Europe. He said, there's growing pressure on European politicians now. And he added, more and more people across Europe say that the EU failed to deliver on the promises it made when it comes to the protection of humanitarian law and human rights.
Yeah.
So public opinion is really becoming a factor here, a disconnect between what people expect and what's happening politically.
Absolutely. And the European Commissioner responsible for crisis management, Hajj Labib,
Yeah.
she oversees the EU's humanitarian aid. She really spelled out the moral side of this. She made it clear this isn't just policy, it's a deep moral crisis for the EU. She said it was time for the EU to find a collective voice on Gaza. And her words in Brussels earlier that week were really powerful. She said, what is happening there is haunting me and should haunt all of us because this is a tragedy. And we will be judged by history.
We will be judged by history.
Yeah. Those aren't just throwaway lines. It conveys this profound moral weight that many are feeling. It's a stark warning, basically, that the EU's reputation on human rights and international law is really on the line right now.
And just quickly, on a related diplomatic point about access, the French Foreign Minister, Jean-Noël Barrot, he commented that there shouldn't be no restrictions on access to next month's United Nations General Assembly. That came after the U.S. decided to deny visas to some Palestinian Authority members. So it just shows how these different diplomatic moves are all kind of connected.
Ties into the broader principles of access to these international forums.
So pulling back a bit, what does all this mean for the EU's ability to act together on the world stage? It's important to remember Gaza isn't the only big international issue where they're struggling to agree, right? The ministers in Copenhagen were also meant to discuss the war in Ukraine, and that shows a wider pattern of these internal difficulties.
Yeah, that provides really important context, which shows this isn't a one-off problem. It's a recurring challenge for them to find consensus. They talked about the future of about 210 billion euros, that's roughly 245 billion US dollars in Russian assets that were frozen under EU sanctions. Now, Ukraine and some EU countries like Poland and the Baltic states, they've been calling for the EU to just confiscate those assets, seize them, and use the money to help Kyiv. For them, it seems straightforward. Aid Ukraine, make Russia pay for the damage. The moral and political case seems clear to them.
But just like with the Gaza debate, some of the big players, France, Germany, and also Belgium, because they hold a lot of these assets, they've rebuffed such calls. It's not just dragging their feet, is it? What's stopping them when others are pushing so hard?
Well, it's really complex. There are multiple layers of concern there. While the argument for using the assets for Ukraine feels compelling, especially morally, countries like France, Germany, Belgium, they're worried about some critical things. First, there's international law. Big legal precedents are at stake. If they seize sovereign assets, could that precedent be used against EU countries down the line? Could it destabilize the whole global financial system?
Okay, I see the bigger picture.
Exactly. Then there's financial stability itself. Would a move like that cause investors to pull money out? Would people lose confidence in the EU as a safe place for foreign assets? And finally, there's also the fear of retaliation. What if Russia hits back against EU assets or businesses still operating there, or even elsewhere? So it's this really tricky balancing act between the immediate political and moral pressure from some members and these very serious legal, economic, and geopolitical risks that others see. So yeah, it just shows that the struggle to find common ground, to actually implement forceful measures, it's a recurring theme for the EU on these huge foreign policy challenges. It's not just Gaza. It points to something deeper, maybe structural, in how they make decisions when the stakes are globally significant.
Yeah, so you can really see the complexity of this meeting in Copenhagen, August 30th, 2025. It just laid bare these deep cracks within the EU. Not just on Gaza, which is devastating, but also on other massive issues like those frozen Russian assets. It's clearly a time of, well, serious reflection for the EU about how they function internally.
Yeah, ultimately, the challenge for the EU isn't just what to do, which specific actions to take, it's how. How do they manage to bring together these fundamentally different priorities, these deeply held values among member states, to actually speak with one collective voice internationally? And that failure to get a majority, even for that initial step, suspending the startup funding, like Kaja said so bluntly, it sends a signal that we are divided. And that division doesn't just affect what they do right now, it hits their long-term credibility, their effectiveness as a unified global power.
So here's something to think about as you process all this. We heard about that change of mood on the streets of Europe, the public pressure building up, and we heard that stark warning from the Crisis Management Commissioner that we will be judged by history. So what do you think the long-term impact of this division, this perceived disunity, could be? On the EU's moral authority, its actual effectiveness as a global player. How does a bloc that was founded on shared values navigate these really deep internal splits when it's faced with global crises that hit right at the heart of those very values? Something to ponder.